All right, my people, welcome back to the Optimistic Fan Club podcast, episode 2. We're looking to just keep burning these things out weekly, not make them too long, but dive into some extra topics than we usually talk about. This is typically Cleveland Browns content in season. Out of season, though, I've done lots of videos on tons of NFL topics and whatnot, so this is the attempt to get an in-season thing that isn't just the Browns. Of course, we will be talking Browns. If you're here just to hear about the Browns, that will be at the end. I've added chapters and time codes, so you can jump to that there. But for now, let's get into it, and we're going to talk today about the Buffalo Bills versus the Chiefs, the Sean McDermott story or leak, whatever you want to call it. It was pretty sketchy the way that it came out and the timing of everything. And then also we're going to talk about Philadelphia versus Dallas this week, and then a little bold prediction on the Green Bay Packers. So let's start off with Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills. The Bills clearly struggling. It seems like they've had a hangover since the 13-second debacle in the 2022 divisional against the Chiefs. Everyone remembers it. It was one of the greatest games that any of us have ever watched. But as of this week, Tyler Dunne dropped this bombshell story. I believe it was Tyler Dunne, or he just talked about it. But drops this bombshell story about Sean McDermott. And I'm sure everyone heard about the 9/11 thing, how he was using stories from 9/11 from not the good guys' perspective to rally the troops and the team, which was very interesting in itself. And that got a lot of the headlines in terms of like, that is just so whack and weird for a coach to try and motivate his team with a national tragedy. But to me, that's not the bigger thing in terms of the grand scheme of the season for the Bills and for football in general. I played football my whole life, all the way from grade 3 through university. I had a lot of characters as coaches through that time, particularly in university as well. And some coaches just aren't good at articulating things, in getting a team pumped up. They're trying to be very rah-rah, even though they might not be that person. They're more robotic. They're more of game planners than analytical type people. So then when they try and do these things to motivate, it comes out weird. It's a bit of the Michael Scott thing where it's like, okay, yeah, you are qualified to be leading this group of people, but your way in doing it is kind of unorthodox and comes across as awkward in a lot of ways. So I just chalk it up to that, where some people just don't know how to motivate. It doesn't make them bad coaches or bad leaders per se. However, what this story actually talked about, if you got into it and read more of the Substack article, was very concerning. And it's kind of a crossroads for the Buffalo Bills at this time. So let's jump into some of those excerpts. I pulled them out for everyone so we could talk about them. But the general theme was that a lot of ex-players and coaches from the Bills through the 7 years that Sean McDermott has been there feel that he's very scared of losing. He plays not to lose rather than playing aggressive to win. He doesn't take accountability in big moments, allows coaches to be fired, shifts the blame to players, and overall is not doing a very good job of galvanizing the team and making the most of all of the talent that they have on this roster. So let's get into it and we'll discuss, and you'll be able to make a decision rather than just seeing the headline of, oh, he's referencing 9/11 to rally the troops. It's much more than that. Okay, so this is from the article regarding his nervousness in tight games, because they are 1-6 in overtime games under Sean McDermott, 0-6 with Josh Allen. So he's so incomprehensibly tight, they say, players cannot help but stiffen up themselves, as if the head coach uses the 2-minute warning to administer mass lobotomies on his team. He's an unnatural communicator, a, quote, robot. He's described repeatedly as a, quote, blamer, Coaches see a boss who preaches accountability while taking none himself. As the Titanic inches toward an iceberg, this captain shoves passengers aside to secure his own lifeboat. So that's pretty damning. That's not a direct quote. That's a lot of inference and then including some of those quotes. And that's what we have to understand. I went to school for journalism, and a lot of it is about framing. And not that this is honest journalism or dishonest journalism. I'm not saying that about Tyler Dunn, who wrote this article. But you can insert quotes saying robot and blamer as the only direct quotes and then build a narrative around that. So let's keep that in mind. But then let's go on to accountability, which seems to be very corroborated. Let me just zoom this in one sec, my people. Remember, these are the unedited shows on this channel, so you got to work with me sometimes. Okay, accountability. One assistant coach remembers McDermott saying in the locker room that the offense scored too fast and let the Chiefs too much time. So this was regarding the 2022 divisional. We all remember 13 seconds left. Chiefs go down, kick a field goal, send it to overtime, win in overtime. So one assistant coach remembers McDermott saying in the locker room that the offense scored too fast and left the Chiefs too much time. And this is a quote from a coach. It was a ludicrous statement. That's pretty damning to have an actual coach confirm that he's saying that. Then the article goes on. The next day, McDermott continued to point the finger. You guys need to get away, the assistant recalled the boss saying. Recharge, reflect, and figure out what you can do better to avoid that happening again. With that, he walked out of the room. It's narcissism, said this coach, because narcissists are a unique conundrum. They want the attention, but they're so insecure at the same time, and that's him. The issue with the team is the guy at the top. It's really nothing else. There are so many examples of his insecurity and his bizarre leadership that you could talk for days. He never takes accountability for anything. Okay, that is pretty serious. And now it starts to become a where there's smoke, there's fire. And this is going back, once again, to the 9/11 thing. That's kind of a smokescreen in itself to detract from the bigger claims that are coming from this article and the reputable people who are giving their opinion about Sean McDermott as a leader. And I've played for coaches like this who don't take accountability, who immediately after a bad drive, the defense comes off the field and they're just berating the players because it didn't go perfectly. And that's kind of what it seems like with McDermott, where if there's any shred of evidence that he's not a great coach because of a player's error or an assistant coach coaching his player the wrong way, he takes it personally as a narcissist. But then when it all works out to plan, he brings it back on himself and he goes, oh, wow, yes, we won as a team, but he's the figurehead of the team, so he gets that credit himself. And then let's move on to an excerpt from an ex-player. And this kind of goes back against. This is in support of McDermott. So let's remember this, because any good journalist will include points that try and aim to disprove and bring balance to the points of view of the reader. So he never, ever, ever does a damn thing with any other intention than to empower and grow the Buffalo Bills franchise, this ex-Bill said. That's a fact. Now, whether or not the shit's going to work or whether or not the players are going to receive it well, that's a different conversation. But it doesn't come from an evil Sean McDermott wants all the praise and all the credit. He genuinely wants every person in that organization to thrive and win a lot of games to the point of exhaustion. All he wants to do is help the team win. Now, that's the truth. So, if you guys remember, a couple of years ago, I believe it was Project Veritas came out and did a big expose on Urban Meyer talking about how he would treat the players at Ohio State, how he would push them to the point of failure, where guys' quads would be tearing when they're doing leg press competitions and mat drills that are injuring people. And this is a handful of guys who come out because they have a bad taste in their mouth. It doesn't mean that their stories and their claims are untrue, but that's the way it works on a football team sometimes. If you have 90 guys on a roster, including practice squad, Not everyone's going to have the same relationship. Sometimes the top guys will have a great relationship. Some of the practice squad guys might have a great relationship, but there's going to be a big middle portion who never really make a connection with a coach. So this is obviously coming from a player who had a great relationship with McDermott, saw the work he was putting in, and could be objective saying, yes, he's not a perfect guy, but all of it comes from a point of trying to win and doing it the right way, which I think can't be lost in all of this, because McDermott is not Urban Meyer. He's not going to bars after he loses and dancing with young women. It's not that. It's not making ludicrous statements to the public. It's not even, and this is going back to what I said last week about Nick Sirriani. Nick Sirianni getting vocal and animated to the point where Jalen Hurts has to pull him back and be like, hey man, calm down. Like, McDermott is a professional, and we'll get to the Sirianni thing in a second, because if there's any Eagles fans watching, I'm sure that you're like, hey man, he's been to a Super Bowl. What are you talking about? We'll get there. But just to say, with all of those things being said, you have to consider that some players and former coaches might have a bad taste in their mouth, so that's why they're leaking this information in this story. However, we will move on to this. And this was something in the article that I felt that I was on the side of McDermott, because a big thing that the author of this article tries to make is that he doesn't understand the greatness that he has in Josh Allen, and that because Sean McDermott has been vocal about wanting to help him develop and stop being just a running playmaking quarterback, that diminishes Josh Allen's greatest strength, which to me becomes contradictory, as we'll talk about here. But this was a quote from Sean McDermott. I don't think that that's a healthy way to play quarterback in this league. And this is in reference to running the ball a lot as a quarterback, being a playmaker. I don't think that that's a healthy way to play quarterback in this league, said McDermott in a video posted by the team. It's really undefeated that things are going to happen when you play that style, that brand of football. So we've got to get that adjusted. It's never going to go completely away, but it has to get to where it's workable. I don't want to take his personality away from him as far as that goes, his signature, but there needs to be an adjustment in that style of play. To me, that's completely reasonable. And Tyler Dunn writing this, I'm sure he's not biased in the sense where he's just trying to get McDermott completely out of there, but then he references McDermott's time in Carolina, and he says, let's start with a player who helped him become a head coach, Cam Newton. When the former #1 overall pick shape-shifted into molten lava on NFL defenses throughout the 2015 season, an MVP season, a 15-1 season, McDermott was the Carolina Panthers defensive coordinator, one of many individuals to directly benefit from Cam Newton throwing 3,837 yards, rushing for 636, and scoring 45 touchdowns in leading Carolina to the Super Bowl. In 2016, the Panthers went 6-10. In 2017, McDermott was named the 20th coach in Bills history. So the way that's built together in the article is basically being like, oh, McDermott doesn't want Josh Allen to play this way. But if you look, the thing that made him become a head coach was Cam Newton playing in the exact way that he didn't want him to. But that's so contradictory, because we know what happened to Cam Newton after that season. After a few more, the injuries started to pile up. So yes, he directly saw the impact of using your quarterback like your main running option constantly. That's the reference that he's making. So it's like you're kind of bursting a bubble in your own point in making that argument. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I personally believe, yes, you need to develop a running game with other players, with a great running back and a solid O-line, so you don't have to use Josh Allen in that way, so he doesn't fall off a cliff the way that Cam Newton did. So that was kind of weird in the article itself, but all of this in general boils down to Can the Bills win these next 2 games? And then can they get back in a wild card spot and make a deep run? Because I think anything less than miraculously winning the AFC Championship, McDermott will be gone. I think that there are a lot of factors and things that we're probably not seeing behind the scenes where players are getting fed up, maybe ownership is getting fed up, and they're leaking these stories to build the pressure. And maybe Bills ownership or the fans or whoever would rather see them lose these next couple games, knock them completely out of the playoffs, and see McDermott be fired, because you could win 2 games and be back in the AFC Championship as the Bills, as Sean McDermott, and then you're left in a conundrum being like, okay, well, we were on the doorstep of the Super Bowl again. What are we going to do? Start from scratch, get a new defensive coordinator, get, a new offensive system, all new coaches as Josh Allen goes into, turning 28 to 29. He's like still in his prime, but how much more time is left in there? It's very interesting. But finally, this is one aspect of the article that I found very, very interesting and that I never really knew. In that 2022 divisional, Leslie Frazier was the defensive play caller and was the defensive coordinator in that game. But late in the fourth quarter, because as we remember, is that back and forth all game long, Sean McDermott took the play calling duties from Leslie Frazier and was basically responsible for that whole drive that happened in those 13 seconds and then through overtime. Like, that was McDermott calling the plays there. And then Leslie Frazier basically gets fired afterwards and takes all of the blame because everyone, realized going into the game Frazier is the play caller. But then McDermott takes the play calling duties, essentially loses the game by the way he called the defense, and then doesn't come out publicly and say, I took that was on me. So from that point, when we find out that fact, that he was basically responsible for the way the defense played in that meltdown and then didn't come out publicly and take that on the chin, that kind of corroborates these stories more than anything in this article. And I suggest you go read it. You can just Google it, the Tyler Dunn, Sean McDermott article. I think there's a lot of stuff that is a little bit petty and is a lot of hearsay where you can't put too much stock into it. But when you have coaches saying that he never takes accountability, and then you have that little tidbit that is verified fact that McDermott took over the play calling and didn't take responsibility for that loss publicly and let his players and coaches get steamrolled for it, that becomes a little bit too much to overcome. So if they lose these next 2 games, I could see him being fired. Easily. However, the Chiefs are mightily struggling this year. As we talked last week, this is the end of the first Chiefs dynasty. They will return, but it will be a different look. But, man, if they lose these next 2, McDermott likely gone, and then even if they work their way through, they have to make a Super Bowl essentially to overcome this, because this is going to become a distraction that is too much to handle. Now that this is in the players' ears, they've all read it, they've all heard about it, they have their friends messaging them being like, oh man, like, did you hear about this from 2022? Anyone on that 2022 roster who lost in that divisional is going to have those feelings brought back up, and that can become too much to overcome within a season because you already have everything that is going on with the team itself. You had last year all the DeMar Hamlin stuff. Like, this team has been on an emotional roller coaster that hasn't really stopped, and maybe similar to the way that the Steelers need to move on from Mike Tomlin, not because he's a bad coach. Mike Tomlin is a great coach, but that they just need a reset and a refresh the same way that Andy Reid did from Philly to KC, Doug Peterson from Philly to Jacksonville. Sometimes you just need a refresh and a new face to start believing in again. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Drop that in the comments. But very, very damning evidence overall. So with that being said, I think the Chiefs will just pull this game out. I think they will just win, but it's going to go down to the wire. And now that this has been planted in people's head and the media is all just going to parrot each other, it will be nonstop of bringing up Sean McDermott's record in close games in overtime, being 1-6. So I think this game will be tight. If the Bills lose another tight one, that's all we will hear about, is that Sean McDermott can't win in close games. Remember 2022? Look at his overtime record. It will be nonstop, and the ownership will be forced to make a change and move on. So I'm going to say 31-27. It'll be something like that. 31-27, 31-28. Very tight, but I'm going to take the Chiefs in this one simply because of all of this noise building up and the fact that some of the players might have deep in their heart that they'd rather lose and see a change. It's weird, but that's how players are sometimes. Even though they want to win and compete, loss might happen and they go, hey man, whatever, season's lost and we need some fresh blood. So now let's talk Philly and Dallas. Philadelphia has been statistically one of the luckiest teams in the league this year. They've been rescued by drops, favorable calls, and, you know, a lot of momentum. Momentum is a very real thing. Then you have Dallas, who either knocks teams out completely or gets knocked out themselves. Most of that has come against teams with 500 records or worse. So they haven't had a lot of tests during that period. And I think Dak has been having absolutely his best season yet. I think CeeDee Lamb has stepped up immensely. Really like the addition of Brandon Cooks. It's just tough. You really have to see how they're going to perform in these games. But also, I don't know how valid the Eagles really are, because Jalen Hurts has taken a step back. He's obviously injured. The run game isn't quite the same. They're a good team, but to me, the valley or the gap between San Francisco and the Eagles is very fast, and not just because of that loss. If you listened to the episode last week, I came out and said that this is going to be potentially a blowout game, because when the 49ers have Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel playing, they're undefeated. It's such a physical, tone-setting thing. They're so good after the catch. Their defense is great. We forget that they added Chase Young. Chase Young was a top 5 pick. Guy's nasty. And they have Nick Bosa. And all their other pieces, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw. They are a great, great team. And if you look at the Eagles, they are not a great man coverage team. When they get forced playing a lot of man coverage, like Darius Slay is getting older. He's not the same guy that he was at one time. So you get a lot more of these breakdowns. Their front's solid, but they're not as complete as they were last year, is the main point that I'm trying to make. So this game could really go either way. I think that the Eagles have played in a lot of highly emotional games. They're starting to get a little burnt out. They have a highly emotional head coach, who I'm going to touch on in a second. And I think the Cowboys, honestly, I think they're going to go in, and this is their big statement game. It won't legitimize them in my eyes for beating the Eagles. I just think it's a right place, right time. You gotta sell while the Eagles are high, even though they lost last week. I just think that they have been beat down to a point where it's going to be hard to level up for another game against a divisional opponent on the road. And Dallas smells the blood. They know that this is their opportunity to leapfrog the Eagles, or at least get even with them in the NFC East standings. So it's going to be a war. I would give the advantage to the Cowboys in this situation. So I'm going to roll with the Cowboys here. And let's just touch on Nick Sirriani for a second, who I mentioned in last week's video. Highly emotional guy. A lot of people like that. To me, regardless of how you feel about it, it's just not sustainable. I think that the Eagles are such a good organization in terms of ownership and GM. It's almost plug and play with the coaches for the most part. And I'm not undervaluing coaches themselves. But with Sirianni, he stepped in. He's had a great roster. They had a bit of a blip the year before they brought him in because of everything that happened with Doug Peterson. But then, he has a stacked defense, good offensive weapons. Harry Roseman goes out, gets A.J. Brown. They draft Devontae Smith. They pick up DeAndre Swift in the offseason this year. It doesn't... There's not one moment to me where you could point to Nick Sirriani so far in his young career and be like, that is the mark of an outstanding head coach. He doesn't call defensive or offensive plays. Maybe he's a bit more of a CEO head coach, but he's not Kyle Shanahan. He's much more Mike Tomlin without the maturity, to me. That's what Sirianni seems like. And light me up in the comments all that you want, but personally, if I was Jalen Hurts, knowing that I'm like the mature public figurehead of this team, I would be a little bit frustrated with how Nick Sirianni carries himself, how he's barking at the other team pre-match. And sure, some people go out and say that, oh, the energy of the team matches the head coach, though, and that's why Philly plays so tough. Kyle Shanahan is a pretty stoic dude. He gets angry, he gets riled up, but he keeps a cooler demeanor in terms of lashing out emotionally. And I think that that is the seriousness that San Francisco carries themselves with. It's like they're tough and they will do things outside the bounds of the rules, get unnecessary roughness penalties. Obviously, Dre Greenlaw getting in the face of Philly's security guy, whoever he was, is not mature. But it just seems like Sirianni kind of has this aura and this environment where he allows a lot of things to slip by the wayside, whereas Shanahan has a shorter leash on what he will allow in his standards. I just don't like the thing of, your coach screaming in the camera, pumping up the crowd, all of this stuff. There's a time and a place for those moments, but the way that Sirianni does it and carries himself is just a little bit too frequently for my liking. So I'd be interested to see how much longer he lasts. I think Philly's going to have a tough time in the playoffs this year. I'm personally taking San Francisco to go all the way and honestly win the Super Bowl. I think they're easily the best team in the league. And I just think it's less likely that Sirianni is in Philly in 5 years than not. So that's a decently bold take, but it'll take some time to come to fruition. But let me know if you guys feel the same, or if not, maybe you guys like that kind of head coach. Personally, I like someone who is a bit more in control of their emotions. So finally, the reason why many of you are probably here, let's talk about these Cleveland Browns going into this game against Jacksonville. A lot of people upset that Kevin Stefanski did not publicly name a starting quarterback. When he was asked why he hadn't, he simply said, because I don't have to. And that's the gamesmanship I like. The fact that people would be mad that a coach is using that to his advantage is so unbelievably immature and infantile. He's using it because DTR is an extremely different quarterback than Joe Flacco. Both very effective in their own ways and have showed that in this offense so far this season. But obviously, he's not going to tell the Jaguars, so they can't prepare for that. And maybe they come out and use a little bit of a mixed package at certain points. That'd be interesting. We'll get to that in a second. But don't be upset with Stefanski for using a tactical advantage. It's what every great coach would do. It's what Doug Peterson is doing with Trevor Lawrence versus CJ Beathard. And now let's talk about that. So as of today, Nathan Rourke, fellow Canadian, I am a Canadian citizen for those who do not know, also an American citizen though, so lay off me. But they signed up Nathan Rourke from the practice roster. So what does that mean? It means maybe Beathard's getting the start. They need to have Rourke available. Maybe it's another smokescreen where Trevor Lawrence is going to be the guy, Beathard's going to be the backup, and they have Rourke available depending on what happens, or if it's a game time decision. There's a million ways that this could go about, but what I believe is that this game is going to be Joe Flacco versus Trevor Lawrence. That is personally what I think. I think that Jacksonville is starting to feel the heat from Houston. Houston is creeping up in the rankings, and they should rightfully be treating this game as a must-win. Let's talk about Flacco versus DTR. Both of them lost the last game they played, but DTR has won a game so far this season. He was really starting to heat up against the Broncos. However, Flacco's ability as a passer gives them a serious advantage, especially if this game winds up being windy. It's not going to be rainy like everyone thought, so it's not as advantageous for Cleveland going into this game. But Joe Flacco, AFC North guy, has played in this environment and these elements so much more. Got a team coming down from Florida. They are not going to be accustomed to it if it starts to get super, super, super windy and it's cold. So Flacco gives you the biggest advantage in terms of baseline from playing the Jaguars. I personally would like to see DTR get mixed in certain, maybe short yardage where you're saying, okay, we could run read option, RPOs on like 3rd and 2, something like that, 3rd and 3. You could bring him in. You can not run gadget plays, but simple RPO, easy install stuff where you're allowing a guy who can extend a play with his feet to grind out tough yards. Maybe not in an extremely must-have scenario where you would rather have Flacco with the ability to pass, but in a 50-50 position where it could be a run, could be a pass, maybe they're going to bring in DTR, give him a few carries, design quarterback run, something like that. And I think that that would be good. I just don't like the bouncing in between too much where it feels like a guy never really has the confidence building up. And this is one thing in terms of Stefanski not naming a starter that some people were upset with, is that in their head, they're like, we saw what happened last time somebody got a last-minute start, and it was DTR against Baltimore when he just completely folded. It's not going to be that. Stefanski has absolutely told one of those two guys that they are starting earlier in the week. I do not think that he would be going into this without privately telling the guy, like, hey, like, you are the guy who needs to be ready and prepared behind. So I think that is Flacco, and then DTR will be ready waiting in the wings, but he's doing a good job building it up in the media saying, hey, if it's me, I'm ready to go. I think he knows that it's not him, and that's fine because this game has become a must win for Cleveland. There is no more messing around. This has been the optimistic Cleveland fan club a lot of the year, and I'm actually rocking this prototype shirt. Let me know what you think in the comments. But the games are over. You have to win now. Even if it's Trevor Lawrence starting, you have a guy playing on one ankle. You got to get after him. You got to hit him early. You got to make them consider bringing in Beathard, who's also banged up himself, and just force this team to crumble in the elements with the home crowd that hopefully sells out, because apparently there's a lot of tickets remaining. I'd be there, but I'm in Toronto right now, people. So this is no more playing around. You have to win this game. You have to win 3 to 4 games to make the playoffs for certain. I think it's a 79% chance if they win that they will make the playoffs, and it drops to 40% if they lose. So it's got to happen now. I think the biggest factor you are going to have to diminish in this game, 1,000%, Travis Etienne. I think Etienne is really blossoming as a young player, and he's a modern back. He's great out of the backfield, catching the ball, oddly explosive and strong as a runner between the tackles for a smaller guy. And just someone who you could see the Browns getting him in some mismatch scenarios on Anthony Walker or Taki where it could become problematic. So they're really going to have to hone in on him. Christian Kirk is out, but they still have Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley. They're going to have options. Evan Ingram has been a solid player himself, so they're dealing with injuries in the same way, but I think you really have to neutralize Etienne because he's going to be a problem if he gets space to work with. And, obviously this defense has to step up. You have to look at this as an opportunity. Playing at home versus the road for Cleveland, they're averaging about 10 points per game allowed at home as a defense, and then 30 on the road. So hopefully that is a true consistency that we see this week, so they can really clamp down on things, because they've been absolutely abysmal the past 2 weeks. So this is a great chance for a rebound game. It's not going to be easy, though, even if it is Beathard. We've seen time and time again throughout this season, backup quarterbacks come in and have good games. The Browns have done it multiple times. You're seeing it with Jake Browning in Cincinnati. Everyone is basically capable in the modern NFL to be a plug-and-play guy and produce something outside of Mitch Trubisky, of course. But it's going to be a good one, and just praying for a win. If not, we'll have a lot to talk about. But I think it will be a good thing. So let's jump to one final bold prediction for the year. And this is something earlier in the year I talked about. I was kind of in the mid-level with Green Bay, just thinking that Jordan Love is going to need some time to get comfortable as a passer. It would probably be a year, and then he'd start taking the steps later on. So I think I had them predicted at about a 7-win team, a 7 or 8-win team. Then they really start turning things up over the past couple of weeks. You really saw it on Thanksgiving that Jordan Love starts lighting the world up, starts delivering the ball really well. You could always see it, and that's why when people were writing him off saying that he's washed, or not even washed, it's just he never was anything, that he's a bust draft pick, he's not going to be able to succeed Aaron Rodgers the same way Aaron Rodgers succeeded Brett Favre. But now that narrative's starting to change, and good on Jordan Love, because to me, when you watch him, like I see, and I mentioned this last week, I see a Justin Herbert type quality where the ball jumps out of his hand. He's not necessarily a dual threat quarterback, but he's very mobile for his size, oddly fast. And they got a good core. Got Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. They have a good collection of guys, and they feel more consistent each and every week. So my bold prediction on Green Bay is that this team is going to win out. Like, they've already snuck into a wild card spot. I think that they will go undefeated the rest of the season and make some noise. I think they could even win a game in the first round of the playoffs. That is my bold prediction, and we will check back in on this. If they lose this weekend, then I will be sure to revisit this. But they've got the Giants, the Bucks, the Panthers, the Vikings, and the Bears for the rest of the season. I really like Green Bay heading into the end of the season, and that's my bold prediction. They will win out, become an 11-win team, a 12-win team, and no. Let me double check one more time, my people. This is the beauty of a live podcast. You get to see me work my computer. They are 6. Okay, they're 6-6. So that would make them an 11-6 team. That is my bold prediction. Green Bay will finish the year winning out, leapfrog the Vikings, and as long as the Lions don't have an unbelievable collapse, they'll finish second. But that is personally what I feel. So, guys, this has been very fun. Obviously, the unedited thing, it's much harder than it looks to talk alone in a room empty, unedited, without making any mistakes and having it flow freely. So thank you for bearing with me as I learned through this time. Really hope you guys enjoyed it. Please hit the link below to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, so you can actually listen on Spotify when you're on the go, so you don't have to have the YouTube app open if you don't have YouTube Premium. The video is also up on Spotify, so you can watch it on Spotify as well. Still working on getting it up on Apple Podcasts. That's going to be a whole thing. When I have the time to deal with that, I will. But just to say, if you want to listen to the show on the go, do it on Spotify. Subscribe so it comes in, and subscribe to this YouTube channel as well, because putting out a lot of stuff. Again, if you're a Browns fan, it's been mainly that, but as the offseason goes on, as we head through the playoffs, depending what happens with Cleveland, we will keep the coverage, we will keep the weekly videos, and I want to keep this weekly podcast going in as well, so we can talk about draft prep, all of those great things. And really appreciate it, guys. If you want to support the channel as well, we got new stickers. We got the Optimistic Cleveland Fan Club bumper sticker. We got the Optimistic Cleveland Fan Club circle sticker with the helmet man. So very good gifts, cheap, can be shipped out before Christmas, and it can tell your Cleveland relatives who are negative all the time to not be so negative. So let me know your predictions for all the games we talked about. Let's talk about what you thought of the Sean McDermott situation and all that. Light up the comments, and please like, comment, share, subscribe, all that stuff. So appreciative for you guys spending your time, and we'll see you next week. Maybe we'll do a show on Monday, who knows, but Browns video will be out Thursday. Later.